very warm welcome to Bharata. First time Frank Rausen Pereira. You're watching Big Picture. And since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. I need it now more so than ever. All this information, along with some must-see recommendations, are in the description of this video. So please go through it. And now, on to the discussion. Well, through three inconclusive Israeli elections in 2019 and 2020, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu managed to keep his opponents at bay and remain in office. He clung to power by intensifying divisions within the opposition, ensuring that although he could not build a majority coalition, neither could they. Yet on Thursday, more than 2 months after an equally inconclusive fourth election, there were several of his opponents signing an agreement that would, if barely, make them the government, assuming they win a vote of confidence in the parliament. For the first time in 12 years, Netanyahu would be out of power. The prime minister, however, signaled that he would not go down without a struggle. He called on lawmakers to oppose what he called this dangerous left-wing government. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the latest political developments in Israel. Joining me on the program today are Anil Trigunayat, former ambassador, Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation, and Pramit Pal Chowdhury, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Ambassador, let me start the program with you first. Let's first try and understand and analyze, the political developments in Israel. It seems like Israel has been in the news for the last month and a half or so, and new development after new development.
Yeah, that region always keeps you surprising. There is no problem about that. That happens, and during Ramadan period, you have it little more every year. That happens. This is an indication of the deep mistrust between the Arab Palestinians and the Jewish Israelis. But as far as the politics is concerned, I mean, I have believed always, and I think that this time the fight between Israel and Gaza was not necessarily due to the old problems of 70 years or so. This was essentially a problem of political opportunism. On the one side, the Hamas wants to take the leadership of the Palestinian cause. On the other, Netanyahu, who was cornered after 4 elections, wanted to show that he is the man who can secure Israel against these Palestinian extremists or the Hamas extremists, and which he did. I mean, to a great extent, he tried to decimate the Hamas military leadership and whatever. But at the same time, it was done after the elections, a fourth. But he was hoping that there will be the fifth election, because he could not stitch the alliance. And when he took this decision, at that time, he was the caretaker prime minister, which he is even today. So what we are seeing is that his party, Likud, got the highest number of seats as expected, about 30. And if there are other right-winger parties put together, would get somewhere around 52 seats in this parliament of 120, where you need, or Knesset as they call it, and 120 out of the 120 seats, you need 61 to form the government. So the President Rivlin, until recently, now President Herzog is there's a new president also. So he asked Yair Lapid, the other opposition leader, who got 17 seats, to try and form the government, which eventually, very last minute, about an hour before the time was expiring, he conveyed it to them that he has been able to stitch an alliance. So now this is a fragile alliance of 8 parties, so to say, of which 3 or 4 of them were very close buddies of Netanyahu, including the Benny Gantz, his defense minister, who's currently in the US, basically trying to get back about $1 billion from them and telling them that there will be a continued this thing. The second one was another important man was Naftali Bennett, who has been once after the Gaza conflict began, he started changing tracks and he wanted to go back with Netanyahu and eventually decided that it was not going to work out. Now, this is an anti-Netanyahu alliance. This is the thing. I mean, they basically want to remove one man. I mean, that's it. And this is probably rightly so, because that might change the complex of the system. But each one, from the extreme right to center to the left, you have people from Labour to Naftali Bennett who are extremely rightist, who are against the Palestinians, against for the settlements, to the people who want to have some kind of a middle way. So this alliance is going to be, they have to still prove on the floor of the House. And of course, Netanyahu is called as the fraud of the century. But from all indications, since everybody's interest is basically removing Netanyahu from the political scene at the moment, and once it is done, and if he's not able to maintain a political status, then there will be these corruption charges for his wife, himself, and his son. Those are going to bite him in the sense. So I believe that at the moment, what we are looking at is a bit of a very fluid scenario. We do not know exactly. Netanyahu is working overtime to once again try to wean them away and not to see that on the floor of the House this passes. But since it's like that, that everybody knows that they have no political future if Netanyahu once again comes, and therefore I think it is which we are seeing playing out at the moment.
Absolutely. All right, Pramit, let me bring you to the picture then. How would you look at all these developments in Israel? What does this mean for the region and Israel in particular?
Said the opposition coalition that has been stitched together is a bizarre jigsaw puzzle of a various group of different groups, including Arab Israeli parties, far right settler parties under Naftali Bennett, and liberal left labor groups under Yair Lapid, all of whom are ideologically have very little to do with each other. But they are all singularly united over the desire to remove Netanyahu. Netanyahu has now ruled Israel for 12 years, non-stop, though he struggled to get a functional majority in the past 4 elections. But he's a survivor, and he's been able to continue to dominate Israeli politics. But the point is that, as the ambassador also mentioned, he faces corruption charges. And I think the key point of the entire coalition is if we can remove him from power, let the coalition, the corruption charges move ahead. This will destroy his political career. After that, the coalition will probably disintegrate and Israel go for another set of elections. But at least Netanyahu will no longer be there on the scene. What does it mean for the region? It doesn't curiously mean, or I would argue doesn't matter all that much. The policies of Israel per se will remain more or less the same. There's a complete agreement that their number one existential enemy in the region is Iran. On that point, even the Iranians agree. The Iranians have no interest, express no desire to come to terms with the Israelis, and are the biggest supporters of Hamas. They also broadly agree. There's a disagreement on whether there should be a two-state versus a one-state. In fact, Lapid and Bennett represent in many ways the two different schools within the Israeli political spectrum about whether or not there should be a Palestinian state, even in the West Bank, let alone in Gaza. But that's almost seen as now an internal debate in Israel, because increasingly the rest of the Arab world does not care. And this has been the fundamental shift, I think, both for the United States and the Israelis have come to accept that countries like Saudi Arabia and so on are much more concerned about Iran and the rivalries, internal and Turkey, the rivalries within the Islamic world and in the Middle East, than they are about this Arab-Palestinian issue. Or to put it another way, if you did resolve the Arab-Israeli problem, the Palestinian-Israeli problem, it would have no impact on the other fault lines in the Middle East. The Iranians and the Saudis and the Gulf Emiratis would remain enemies. Turkey would remain a problem. It would make no difference. So the irrelevance, if you wish, of the Palestinian issue is also why, if you look at it, the Biden administration has while it has appointed almost 20 special envoys for all sorts of issues, climate change and so on, has not chosen one for the Arab-Palestinian issue. Simply not interested. It does not want to get involved. So therefore, and then the other issue, of course, is that what does this matter as far as the problem of Syria, Iraq, both of which are increasingly have come under strong Iranian influence. So again, they are not overly concerned about the Palestinians. They use the Palestinian issue, but their game is fundamentally driven more by Iran and by their own local concerns regarding Turkey, the Kurds, and various other concerns. So you can see that the Palestinian issue, while it consumes a large portion of the Western media and intellectual groups, in the Arab world, increasingly there's a certain, we feel sorry for the Palestinians, but frankly, there's nothing more. We have other problems on our hands. And Hamas is, of course, within the Palestinian issue, even more marginal in the sense that it does not accept it. It does not have a peace agreement with the Israelis, does not accept a settlement, and is seen as completely beholden to Iran as far as its broader foreign policy. And because it is effectively the Palestinian faction of the Muslim Brotherhood, it is deeply hated and distrusted by the establishment in Egypt, in Jordan, and all the monarchies in the Middle East, and in fact also in Syria. In Iraq, they're not much of an issue. The only real country that supports them in the Arab world is Qatar, because Qatar plays its own funny games, even though it's a monarchy. So you end up with the Arab Palestinians becoming increasingly used, the Palestinians being used by different groups in the larger Arab Middle Eastern situation, but ultimately they're not really interested in resolving the issue, and they really don't care what happens to the Palestinians themselves.
Absolutely. How things have changed, haven't they? General, do you believe that the fault lines and the goalposts in the Middle East or in West Asia have shifted, and this becomes a little more complex for India as well as a whole?
As Pramit has brought out, Frank, the goalposts have shifted completely, and the Arabs are no longer giving that same degree of support which they did, say, when you're talking in the 60s and the 70s. And that was the time when India too extended its support in a much stronger way to the Palestinian cause. And now the Indian stand is more nuanced and it is balanced both with the Jewish state of Israel and with the Palestinian people. And in the recent when India had given its comments in the UN, I think we came under flak from both sides. But that is the way things will be when you actually try to disassociate yourself from taking any one particular side. But when you're looking at this larger picture, one thing which stands out as far as Israel politics is concerned, which is what we were talking about, there is no way in which Israel is going to get a politically stable regime simply because of the way their voting structure is organized. They don't vote for individuals, they vote for a party. And any party which can gather 3.5% of the votes, they are eligible to get a seat in the Knesset. Now, out of these 120 seats, let us say if this had happened in India, and we've got 25% of the seats which have been taken by the Likud party. Had it been an Indian election, the Likud party would have got an absolute majority, seeing the way the other people are so fractured. The other parties have got 7 seats, 6 seats, except for one of them which has got 17 seats. That is Yair Lapid's party, the Yesh Atid. They've got 17 seats, but I think the rest of them are 7 seats, 8 seats, 4 seats, like that. So had this been an election, where everybody gets together and the winner takes all, then Netanyahu would have swept the election hands down. Now, in this particular case, regardless of whoever is going to win it, there is no way in which you can ever have a stable political regime in Israel. Stable, I mean politically stable. The one outstanding feature, however, of the Israeli political system is that when they come under an external danger, then all the political parties will unite together against that external threat. as they did recently in the conflict which you saw. And that is very unlike India, because in India, when we have a military threat now, the opposition, unfortunately, will be on the side of the power which is militarily against India in a bid to unseat the government. It's a very harsh statement to make, but I've seen this now for quite some time, and I think it is something which the Indian polity needs to very seriously reflect upon. Now, coming to the second issue, what has changed? I think really fundamentally what has changed is, and I'll continue with where Pramit had given his views. It is fundamentally the rivalry which is existing between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this, I think it is this rivalry which should be a very serious cause of concern to India. There is, of course, also the rivalry between Turkey and Saudi and the Saudis. But to that extent, I really don't feel that is much of a concern to India as the Iran-Saudi rivalry, because the Iran-Saudi rivalry impinges directly on India's interests. And these interests are the two major interests. One, I will say, is one is on our energy, and secondly is on the very large expat population of India, which is working in the Gulf countries. Because if this rivalry actually spills over to conflict, if the Gulf closes down or something, anything can happen. We've had the biggest Iranian ship actually going down in flames, and we really don't know the cause. We've had earlier Aramco was hit. So anything can happen in the Middle East or the Gulf, whichever way you would like to call it. And anything which happens there impinges on our security, which is a much more serious security threat than either China or Pakistan could be. Because if your energy resources get controlled or get restricted, dramatically restricted, then what are we seeing? We are seeing a slowdown of the economy due to the Wuhan virus. And then we see the double whammy coming in on the energy crisis. And it'll be a very difficult act for the government really to pass through this stage. So I think this is a very serious threat to India. And India's diplomats, I presume, would be working overtime to ensure that that doesn't spill over, as would other countries who are dependent. So
Absolutely.
now, I don't see any change in this scenario coming about. So we are going to live with this scenario for quite some time. The Palestinian cause, of course, Israel keeps talking about it, but as very rightly brought out by the ambassador, for the Israelis too, Iran is the primary threat. And in my own interaction with many of the think tanks and some of the leadership elements, or rather the diplomatic elements within Israel, they have very clearly stated that when the Iranians threaten them with extinction, they take it very seriously. And they have said that because they take it seriously, they will retaliate in any way which they see fit, because for them it is an existential threat. So seeing that, I don't see any changes as far as the Arab-Palestine or the Arab-Israeli equation is turned. We are finding that within the Arab states, their relationship with Israel is getting better and better. In fact, the recent the turmoil which took place between Israel and the Palestinians, Egypt played a major role in getting the peace accord through. So we are finding a completely different scenario now, but India's interests still lie on stability in the Middle East. Especially, we don't want any conflict erupting between the two major antagonists there, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Frank.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll come to India in just a bit, but Ambassador, let me take the point that the general was making forward with you about political stability in Israel. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there has been a single party which has got single largest majority in Israel ever, and that is an issue. But yet they seem to unite as far as certain causes are concerned. So will we ever see political stability because of the nature of the political system in Israel?
Well, as Jana Saab said and Pramit said, it is very unlikely because they do have a very large spectrum of political opinion. But in this time, what you are seeing is in this alliance, which has been staged, which they call it Coalition for Change, in that for the first time, you are also seeing the Arab Party, United Arab Party, which has 4 seats. They are not being part of the government, they'll not be, but they have agreed to support them. Now, that is because there are two reasons for that we have seen right now is because during this conflict, one of the biggest problems that happened was that the Arab Israelis who are citizens of Israel, they are the ones who rose against the problems that they were facing at Al-Aqsa Mosque or evictions and others. And that's what today, as I hear, about 2,000 people have been arrested who have been protesting all over. So there is a churn within Israel itself. So that is a bit more dangerous in my view, because they constitute about 20% of the population, of the total population of Israel. And the issues of which are the real issues that are there, like evictions of people from Sheikh Zarrah or from Silvan and all that. Like today, what was happening is yesterday, I think, when they were carrying out an Olympic rally or something, these Arabs, they were all, large number of them were arrested or were dispersed by using this rubber bullets and whatnot. So this, what the problem there is, that there is an internal discourse, and there is, once again, we are seeing the problem of coalescing of the populations within the country. Now that is inside. That is the new thing which one has seen this time. It was not there in the earlier times when we have seen the problems, and that is a bit of a. So from that perspective, if you come to think of it, it is important that this particular alliance, and as Parmeet also said, that the whole idea is that after Netanyahu is debarred or whatever happens to him, corruption charges, they would probably like to go for another election and might see a little bit of a change, different kind. But people in Israel, I mean, more and more people that you talk to, I mean, you have seen it, there is a growth of a certain segment who wants somehow to arrive at a solution where they can live peacefully and do not have to worry about these extremist attacks or others. Thirdly, I think that if the currently the Palestinians are trying to stitch themselves together, like Hamas has definitely acquired a much greater heft despite having suffered a lot of casualties. Politically, they have emerged as one of the major forces. So they will have to also learn how to deal with Iran. I mean, with Israel, because you cannot deny the existence of Israel and then try to expect them to be kinder to you. That's not going to happen. Likewise, the Israeli coalition, and what one is hearing, of course, Naftali Bennett is an extremist in many sense of the term, but he will also be restrained. I mean, Benny Gantz, for that matter, when he was in the US, he mentioned that we do not want to deal with our biggest benefactor, that is the US, in the public domain. If we have differences, we would like to resort to resolve the differences internally and bilaterally, rather than going, for example, on Iran. I mean, that is their biggest enemy, and for the Iranians, the Israelis are the biggest enemy. So this is going to remain a challenge, and I don't think that the politically it will be a coalition politics. And frankly, if you come to think of it, in most countries in the world, the democracies now, except those where a two-party system or something like that, the coalition has become the norm, and that is probably the growth of democracy in certain sense.
Absolutely. Pramit, coming back to you now, does this mean that it's the end of the road for Benjamin Netanyahu? I mean, what's likely to happen? He's a wily old customer at the end of the day. He may just pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Correct. I mean, he is a survivor, and he's survived for 12 years, despite I'm not certain, but I think about half of those years not even having an actual majority in parliament. I mean, even on a coalition level. Yes, I think he's already working very hard. He has to break off only one party from that coalition to be able to ensure that their majority disintegrates. The Speaker of the House, who in many ways controls the procedural issues, is his ally. In fact, this coalition will have to first somehow get rid of the Speaker before they can even get around to getting rid of Netanyahu. So there's still many a slip twixt cup and lip before they can actually be certain that Netanyahu will be able to be dislodged. And as we've mentioned, this coalition survives only on one issue, is Netanyahu. So it's not impossible for him to find a means to break off as one MP. He doesn't have to break off anything major, just one MP for him to survive. So yes, it's still a while to go. I think the desire just to get rid of his domination, end his domination of Israeli politics for 12 years, is overriding. But it's quite possible that this recent conflagration with Hamas will help him And I think he wouldn't even mind somehow forcing another election rather than allowing this coalition to come in, because after this Hamas battle, I have a suspicion he'll pick up a few extra percentage votes, just enough to be able to push his coalition over the majority level. So yes, no, I don't think the game is over yet for him. We'll see how this plays out. But if he does fall from power, and the corruption charge, the investigation starts to roll on against him, it will be relatively difficult for him to come back.
Absolutely. General, coming back to you now, so talking about the coalition and talking about all these other leaders from different walks of life, different ideologies coming together as one, it seems like a desperate attempt, and like has already been mentioned in the program so far, to keep Benjamin Netanyahu out. But does that bode well for the general public in Israel?
Frank, very frankly, as far as the general public is concerned, they are quite used to the way Israeli politics functions. So for them, I think this would be routine. I really don't think they'll be viewing it too seriously. So the real issue is whether Netanyahu will survive or not. I think that is the current issue as far as Israeli politics is concerned. Now, as per the deal which they have had, the Yamina party and the Yesh Atid, which is led by Yair Lapid. Now, within these two parties, the first prime ministership is going to be given to Naftali Bennett, and he has only 7 seats in the 120-member House. So you take your mind back, to the days when India had a similar problem, and you had the lowest common denominator actually becoming the prime minister, not the people who had the majority seats. Now here, a person with 30 seats is out of the picture, who really represents a larger share of the majority, and a person with 7 seats is going to occupy the high chair, and after 2 years hand it over to Lapid, who's got 17 seats. Now, I really don't know. This doesn't really gel. It doesn't really gel. And I have a feeling that there will be enough public opinion within Israel to force pressure onto certain of their lawmakers. At the moment, the House is there with 120 members. So the public is going to force them to change stance. I personally don't see Netanyahu going anywhere. I think I'm not saying that he will remain the prime minister, but I think they will be more likely headed towards the second election. However, as Pramit very rightly put it, should the opposition actually pull out a rabbit from the hat and actually form a government, which may fall after 3 months or 6 months, then Netanyahu's days are numbered. I mean, it's over. It's as far as he's concerned, it's over. I don't think that's going to happen. As far as the speaker is concerned, Yariv Levin, he's actually a part of the Likud party. So he's not going to allow that to happen. His self-interest is very firmly with Netanyahu. And as we have seen also in Indian politics, the role of the speaker is very, very important. And what this particular speaker will do, he is going to delay the vote till the very last moment. I think it is going to be the 14th of June. I may be wrong on that date, but I think it is the 14th of June. He'll ensure it doesn't take place earlier. Because the longer this coalition stays, trying to grapple with their problems, the worse it is going to get for them. So in my view, politics in Israel will continue to remain fragile. I don't think it will have any impact per se on the Israeli security establishment or on their economics or on any other factor. I think politics will continue to play its own path independently of all other factors, because should there be a threat to Israel, then every single constituent of Israel will come together. One last point, which the ambassador mentioned, which I think I would like to support. You see, for the first time when the present conflict between Hamas and Israel took place, I think for the first time you found the Israeli Arabs, which constitute about 20% of the population, actually came on the streets, which has never happened earlier. And for the first time, even in the West Bank, we found the Arabs actually getting a bit perturbed. Otherwise, in the earlier conflicts, the West Bank has stayed aloof from what is happening in the Gaza Strip. So there has been a slight shift, but the West Bank is very chary of control shifting to the Hamas, which is in control of the Gaza Strip. They don't want the Hamas to get into the West Bank, primarily because the West Bank is far more comfortable in many ways than what is happening in the Gaza Strip. So they don't want any increase in violence there. But things are changing, and how that will be resolved, I really don't know. Because the last stumbling point, which I personally see in this entire conundrum, is how Jerusalem is going to be resolved, and I think that is going to remain a stumbling block, even if all other aspects are agreed to. Frank.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Time to get quick closing comments from all my panelists for the best way forward. And we'll talk about India as well. Ambassador, do you think that anything will change if there is a change of guard in Israel? Does it change foreign policy? Does it change the way that they engage with India? Or will it just continue to be the same?
Well, we have very good relations with Israel. I mean, the really strategic the totally anything that you put into the strategic basket is there with the Israelis, and it is for both sides. It's not only for us or for Israelis. So I don't see there is any change as far as relations with India is concerned. As far as their foreign policy generally is concerned, I think it will remain exactly the same. I mean, there is unlikely to be any difference, except that it is possible that you might not see a lot of criticism of US and others, because we should not forget one thing, that even though US will always stand with Israel and that's their primary aspect of foreign policy, there is no love lost between Netanyahu and Biden. That is also a fact. And therefore, I think that that's a personality kind of a thing. You remember that despite Obama not wanting Netanyahu to visit, he did go to Washington. He even addressed the congressman. So that speaks volumes of the Jewish lobby in the United States. So I think that there is not going to be much of a difference as far as the foreign policy of Israel is concerned, and including their relations towards India.
Amit?
Yeah, I would agree. I think especially in the Israeli-India relationship, you have to realize that, look at it, it's completely, if you wish, multi-partisan in Israel. It began under two Labour prime ministers. The reach out to Israel, to India, and the normalization of relationships was many ways led by Shimon Peres and later by Yitzhak Rabin. It was then continued with Ariel Sharon, Ehud Barak, and it has continued, of course, under Netanyahu. I would argue the BJP has been much closer to Israel than the Congress, but ultimately it was Narasimha Rao who began the process in our normalization. So across the board, the relationship now between us and the Israelis, between India and Israel, is now so deeply entrenched that the one accomplishment I think the Modi government did was to say that the talk of hyphenating Palestine and Israel makes no more sense. These are now relationships that have moved in two completely different trajectories. We will maintain a relationship with the Palestinian Authority. We recognize them, and we have an aid program. But the Israel relationship is now separate. And I think that was just an expression of the actual reality of what was happening. And Israel is completely committed across all parties as far as relationship with India is concerned.
And General, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Now, I think, Frank, as far as India is concerned, I think one of the prime foreign policy achievements of the present government, starting from 2014 onwards, was this dehyphenating our foreign policy from those countries which were antagonistic towards each other. So you find that India's relationship with both Saudi Arabia and Iran have been very stable. As very rightly mentioned, we have dehyphenated the Palestinians from the Israelis. The US from Russia, etc., etc. We are dealing with each country on an independent basis, and I think that has been one of the prime successes of the government and of our diplomatic community. This is one. Number two, I think as far as Israel is the local politics within Israel is concerned, I don't think India is going to get too involved into what is happening there. The Israeli people, in due course of time, will sort it out themselves. I think they are more attuned to that sort of chaos than what we are in India. To that level of chaos, I really don't know how we would have handled it if we had that chaos in India. But on the larger thing, I think as far as India is concerned, it's going to be very important for us, as I had mentioned in my opening remarks, to ensure stability in the Gulf. This, I think, is a vital security concern of India. It is something to a very large extent, it is existential for India too. Because if any conflict erupts in the Gulf, especially between the two major powers, Saudi Arabia and Iran, and then other people start, getting onto it, it is going to spell very, very bad days for India. And the two countries which are going to get out of it, which really won't have much impact, are really the United States and Russia. Russia is independent for energy resources of the Gulf, and so is the United States. So if both of them allow a conflict to erupt in the Gulf, they will be by and large excluded from that conflict. But I think the people in Asia, especially India, we're going to be very badly impacted. And I think both our political, the establishment, the government of the day, as well as the diplomatic community, I think they must actually work very hard to see that that state does not arise. A little bit of conflicts here and there we can handle, but a full-scale conflict, I think, will be disastrous for India, and we must ensure peace in the Gulf remains. That would be to the long-term interest and the short-term interest of India. Frank.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that the coalition to unseat Netanyahu is a fragile one and may not survive till the vote of confidence in parliament. The speaker being from Netanyahu's Likud party is a big factor as well. The coalition will first have to unseat the speaker. If the coalition is capable of keeping Netanyahu out, it may be the end of the road for him. Netanyahu, however, is a seasoned campaigner and will do everything to force another election like he's done in the past. That election may go in his favor considering what has happened between Hamas and Israel. The political uncertainty in Israel, however, will not impact India in any way. We have to be concerned about the developments in West Asia as a whole. Now, that is a bigger worry for us. Once again, thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. I need it now more so than ever. All this information along with must-see recommendations are in the description of this video below. Please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.